It was a life-enhancing experience. I can say that now, 13 years into remission. It was a shock. I was 30 years old. I had a 1-year-old daughter. I think it teaches you resilience, what's important, what's controllable, and what's not controllable. I understand investing. I enjoy investing. I'm reasonably good at it. I also took the opportunity to ask myself, if this is what you enjoy doing, can these skills be ported over to invest in spaces that are trying to solve some real issues? ABC Impact is a growth-oriented fund focused on impact. We write anywhere from $30 to $70 million US check for significant minority stakes. From a geographic perspective, we are pan-Asian. So we invest in India, Southeast Asia, and China. We've identified themes and sectors where business growth and impact are collinear. So when the business or the product grows, impact grows. That allows us to be more confident that should we achieve business growth, profitability growth, impact will move in tandem.
Over 83% of you that listen to or watch this show regularly haven't yet subscribed to this show. So could I ask you for a favor before we start today? If you like the show and if you like what we do here and you want to support us, the free and simple way that you can do just that is by hitting the subscribe button or following us on your podcast app. It helps this channel more than you know. Thank you and enjoy this episode. Sugandhi, it's great to finally connect with you. I've been looking forward to getting together for a while now.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so grateful. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to telling you more about the work we're doing at ABC Impact.
I always start these conversations first by trying to understand who you really are beneath all your titles and all your achievements, which are many. I believe your story starts in India. Tell me about your upbringing. What was home like? Who were the people that shaped you, and what values were instilled in you early on that you still carry with you to this day?
So I was born and brought up in India. I completed all my education based out of India. And then I moved to Singapore about 20 years ago. Both Singapore and India are home. And I would say both have had pretty formative influences on who I am as an individual.
What part of India was your childhood home?
So I spent the first 16 years in Mumbai. I'm originally from Uttar Pradesh. My family roots trace back to UP. And then I've also lived in sort of Western and Southern India for a bit. So when people ask me which part of India I am from, it's a pretty difficult question to answer. So I'm from many different parts of India. And I've learned different things. I'm the younger child in a family of 4. I have an older brother. And my formative influences are engineering. My father is an engineer. My brother is an engineer. I am a computer engineer. So I think very sort of analytical, quantitative, logic-driven sort of internal mind model. We tend to think about everything in those terms.
Your father was an engineer. Did your mother have a profession?
She has a master's degree and she was a homemaker. She was a huge inspiration. She was influential in kind of teaching some personality values around patience, around being thoughtful, around being caring. What does it mean to have a home? What are the principles? So she's a big influence too.
Were there any conversations around the dinner table or memories you have growing up that ultimately influenced your journey towards responsible and impact investing?
I think there are a few things that I carry over from childhood around women empowerment, and I'm giving every woman the same opportunities. So, I never felt that I was disadvantaged at home as compared to my older brother. And I feel that I was very fortunate growing up in middle class India to have basically been given the same opportunities around education and pursuing a career that not everybody takes for granted. So I think that's one principle that I've kind of carried forward and, spend a lot more time focused on how women can be more active participants in all spheres of life. And I specifically look at sort of female funders and founders as something that started from childhood. Having seen that equality principle at home kind of makes you very aware when you see it not being practiced, right? So it just really starkly tells you that not everybody gets the same opportunity. There was a lot of room for debate in my house. I would say I wasn't the easiest teenager. I think at one point my parents would have preferred that I became a lawyer because a lot of litigation was involved at home. I still believe in sort of the right to make your point, the right to challenge what older people think. Asian societies are very designed to respect elders' opinions, even if you may disagree with them. So I think at a very young age, I was really given a lot of space to argue. And I did argue. That's very formative. Dinner table conversations where you were allowed to challenge and you were allowed to question and make your viewpoint. It may not change the decision, but you were definitely allowed to make your case.
Not all votes are equal, huh?
Yes, exactly. So I think those are two things that I've carried over from childhood.
Did you say that your parents wanted you to be a lawyer, or you're just saying that they might have expected you to be the way you argued?
They might have expected me to be a lawyer, or they felt I would have been very effective. And I feel the same way about my teenager. I have a 14 and a half year old daughter, and I can see that I'm in the same stage where I think she would make a very good litigator.
Well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say.
Ouch. It hurts when you're on the other side.
Around 1998, you entered university to study computer science at MSU University. And if I rewind to 18-year-old Sugandhi, what was the appeal of computer science to you at that point in time? Were you one of those people who just loved solving problems through code? Or did you see this more as strategic career positioning? That's what you wanted to do.
It was by elimination. Interested in quant. I was a math nerd versus a biology nerd. I was definitely very logical, interested in problem solving. And it's by elimination that I ended up choosing computer science. I was quite good at it. So I really enjoyed it. I think in the end, coding forces you to be very analytical, and it kind of plays into that problem solving part of my brain. I did graduate at the worst time though. If you remember the 2000.com bubble, I graduated in 2002, entered a very challenging work environment. I think a lot of us in that batch had our jobs rescinded or canceled. So my first big lesson was how your life can be impacted by external shocks that have nothing to do with your specific situation. So I had to pivot. So I had to, the jobs weren't there. So I applied for a master's of business administration, and it was a pivot. It was never the plan. I always wanted to work for a few years before I studied more, but I basically went straight into MBA because I couldn't find good employment at that point in time.
And you did that at IIM, one of India's most prestigious business schools. And I guess during the course of that program, you even did an exchange semester at University of St. Gallen in my backyard here in Switzerland. So I think you explained that you just did that because you couldn't get a job, or at that point, did you have some idea that maybe business and finance as opposed to technology was where you wanted to build your career?
I think when I entered, it was more out of a push rather than a pull. The logical next step that, if the job markets are challenging, let's just continue studying. And it's a privilege to make it to one of the IIMs. I think very soon into the IIMs, the business part of it became really attractive, right? Because that's how U is created. You learn the different aspects of value creation, and that became really interesting. It also opened up the worldview. And if you talk about HSG or, in the University of St. Gallen, it just gives you a much more global perspective, right? I think once you're in an MBA environment, you really learn how to look at everything holistically. You're not just focused on one part of the business.
And it's a beautiful place.
I had an impoverished 4 months in Switzerland, and I say that I hope it resonates with a lot of people that if you're an exchange student on a limited budget, Switzerland is one of those places where beauty is free. Natural beauty is free to enjoy.
But that's it. That's where it stops.
Exactly. I was on a budget because my dad had obviously lent me the money to go there. And, shout out to him. He never asked for it back, but I was on a tight budget. So I was really watching what I was spending. But yeah, it was a beautiful experience.
You can't have more of a contrast coming from India to Switzerland in terms of sticker shock,
I'll tell you the story where there were a bunch of us who came from the same school, I in Bangalore, who in different parts of Europe. And I used to compare notes with them and talk to them. And, everybody used to eat a lot of McDonald's because when you're on a student budget, McDonald's is your happy place. And then in Switzerland, even McDonald's wasn't a happy place. It's expensive burgers and McDonald's. That's my memory. Yeah.
After business school, I did a year at the Sorbonne in Paris, and I also was in McDonald's. I mean, France was cheaper than Switzerland, but I remember going to Switzerland and hitting sticker shock then as well. Then you reach this pivotal moment around 2005 or 2006 where you're fresh out of IIM in Bangalore. You join Temasek in Singapore as an associate director in their financial services team. So that's impressive first role out of business school. I guess that entailed a move to Singapore. How did that opportunity come about? And what was it like for you growing up in India, studying in India, and moving to Singapore, one of the world's most sophisticated, I guess it's not truly a sovereign wealth fund, but a wealth fund?
It was a tremendous privilege. So Temasek came to the university to recruit as part of their sort of recruitment outreach outside of Singapore. And I joined in June 2005. I think what attracted me was a few things. One was that the people who came to interview us were amazing people. And I think that's one of the threads that I've seen in my career and my decision making, that actually the people you meet, I really index to the people, whether their values and the way they think about things resonate with me. And I've made a lot of joining decisions based on that. And it was an opportunity to, again, sort of spread my wings, get a more pan-Asian exposure. So I moved here at the age of 24, first time living abroad, except for the exchange semester. I became an associate director after 3 years, but I spent the 3 years basically doing financial services investing, and being part of the India team for some time, looking at Indian investments, which was super exciting.
Your role when you joined was actually being on the investment side?
That's right. So I joined on the investment side. I was part of the India team for about a year. And then I moved to the financial services team.
As an analyst or?
Associate. We used to call it an associate, but it's an entry level program. So you're basically running the models, you're writing the IC papers, you're doing all the scenario analysis, and then as you progress to an associate director, you're also looking at term sheets, you're negotiating, you're running diligences. So it's a very structured sort of analyst associate AD program.
Temasek is quite well known in the whole impact world, but eventually ABC was part of the initial investment in the startup of ABC. But you didn't really come to impact until later. Was there anything in your mind about impact when Temasek recruited you, or was this just absolute return investing?
Absolute return investing. I think for me, Temasek has been about coming back to the family. And I guess we'll walk through my journey. But when I joined teams which were completely commercial. I myself was very commercial. I was paying off my mortgage and, focused on sort of trying to rent a better house in Singapore. I will say that Temasek has always been, even at its core, commercial investing has been a values-driven organization. So I would say, versus some of the other commercial providers of capital, just given who they are, I learned early in my career to have a more balanced view of investing. I would say decisions are made on certain parameters, which are very similar to other commercial providers of capital, but they do teach you through the work they do, through the HR practices. They're such a good employer that you do learn that there's a broader perspective on everything.
No, it's a very well run shop and well known. So I guess you spent about 3 years there cutting your teeth. And then somewhere around mid-year 2008, I might remind listeners, this is right as Lehman Brothers is collapsing and the global financial system is in free fall. You, on the other hand, decide to join Actis as an investment principal focusing on Southeast Asia mid-market private equity. So that was either incredibly brave or incredibly crazy, depending on your point of view. What did you see in that moment of what I would describe as maximum chaos that convinced you to leave the relative safety of a large, stable wealth fund for the volatility of private equity at that particular point in history?
So I was at Temasek and I was 27 years old. That's right. And I was just, it's such a privileged position. It's such a privileged place to work. And in 3 years, I had seen, a large number of transactions. I had the opportunity to, run numbers, go to the IC for public investments as in listed company investments, also private investments, companies from the range of 100 million equity value to a few billion equity value. So I had seen a wide range of investments. The view I took as a young person at that time was that, if I look at private equity as three stages, right? There's finding the deal, there's evaluating the deal, and then there's kind of winning the deal. On the investment side, I really had no pressure to find the deal because Temasek is such a well-known, it's the biggest shop in town. Everybody hits up Temasek. I don't want to say you never really have to originate because obviously that's changed as time has passed, but you can, as a young person, there's just no time to go and originate because you're just processing. So I told myself that if I want to hone those skills, I should move to a smaller shop. And Actis, had a 6-7 member team in Singapore. If you remember, or for the benefit of your listeners, Actis had just spun out of CDC, which was the Commonwealth Development Corporation back in 2004, if I'm not wrong. So they had very developmental roots, but they had just spun out into this entrepreneurial fund. And I had the opportunity to meet them, and I felt like that was a good way to kind of put myself in an environment where I would be forced to do certain things, like originate, like do more active portfolio management. And that's how I made that decision. We were a bit insulated from the GFC because Actis had already raised a private equity fund, and we weren't under pressure to deploy. I mean, I wouldn't say we were insulated, but there wasn't an immediate impact of the GFC per se.
Overall, you spent around 5 years at Actis, which is significant tenure in private equity. But sometime during your tenure, you were diagnosed with breast cancer. And spoiler alert, happily, you are a 12 years survivor at this point, which we're grateful for. But that experience at that point in your life must have been absolutely terrifying. How did you face your own mortality at such a young age, and how did that change you and your perspective on life and what you wanted to do with your life?
It was a life enhancing experience. I can say that now, 13 years into remission. It was a shock. I was 30 years old. I had a 1-year-old daughter. A shock for me. It was a shock for my family. I think it teaches you a lot of things. Obviously, it teaches you resilience, but it also teaches you, or you learn to realize what's important. You also learn to realize what's controllable and what's not controllable. So just to give you an example, when you go for chemotherapy, they give you this pamphlet, which basically has all the possible side effects that you may have from chemo. And then the first time you open the pamphlet, it basically lists everything from like a sneeze and a rash to kind of, life-threatening impacts. And the first time you read the pamphlet, it's a good reminder that there's not much you can control. The same drug given to Scott can result in a side effect, which is X, and the same drug given to Sugandhi can result in a side effect, which is Y, right? It was life-changing, but when I came back to the workforce, and, I shout out to Actis. Actis was a lovely employer. They supported me through the medical treatment. I never had any financial stress related to that. But when I came back to the workforce, I did go through a process of kind of asking myself, what do I enjoy doing? And what do I want to do going forward? So I learned that I enjoyed investing. I really enjoy looking at a business, thinking about the value drivers, thinking about what can be enhanced, what can be reduced, components of a management team and a business plan and stakeholders and how they all interact together. But then I also took the opportunity to ask myself that if this is what you enjoy doing, which is investing, can these skills be ported over to invest in spaces that are maybe trying to solve some real issues, right? And that's how I ended up in LeapFrog. So it was less of I know that this is the mission I have. It was more like, I understand investing. I enjoy investing. I'm reasonably good at it. Can I just do that in a field where companies and businesses are addressing environmental and social issues?
Was there an aha moment where you concluded that traditional private equity might not be giving you the kind of purpose that you're ultimately seeking? Or was it a general trend through this life-changing experience you had?
No, I think it was a general realization that private equity is the most capitalistic of the industries, right? Like you pretty much hunt, and then what you kill, you get 20% of it, right? It's literally the epitome of capitalism from that perspective. It attracts a certain type of people, and certain type of people are good at it, and it forces you to think about things in a certain way, which is why I think it's so successful and so much fun. So I enjoy private equity. It was never a disillusionment with private equity or anything of that kind. I think I enjoy that part of the thing. I just wanted to help companies and business and founders who are trying to address issues. I was never, even today, when I talk about ABC Impact, we're always commercial interest commercial returns focused. So a business has to be sustainable. It needs to meet the basic private equity needs of return on capital.
Around 2014, you make this pivotal move and you joined LeapFrog Investments as a director. And for listeners who might not know LeapFrog, they're one of the pioneers in impact investing. They got $1 billion fund focused on financial inclusion. You know Stuart Langdon, who was previously on the show in one of the earlier episodes. He's a great chap. It's a great company. And he had absolutely great stories to tell. Tell me how this job at LeapFrog came about and what were you doing there?
I took a time off from Actis, or I left, and I said, I wanted to kind of just refocus on my health. I would also use this opportunity to tell listeners that, kind of going back and focusing on making sure that you're the healthiest version of yourself is also an investment worth making. So I did do that. I spent about a year doing that. And once I was ready to enter the workforce, I did the usual, reaching out to people, headhunters, etc. So they were recruiting and they found me. Michael Fernandez, who is one of the partners, and he headed the private equity business for a while, along with Stuart, etc. I met with them. I met Andy, was instrumental in giving me the courage to kind of make the shift. He's just such a charismatic and inspiring person. And I think the story about the positive power of capital and capital being a force of good, I think just really resonated with me. I felt I could really help them a lot because I was obviously very experienced in financial services and I had deep networks in South and Southeast Asia. So I spent the 3 years basically investing for them across FS, which is financial services, in India and Southeast Asia. So we invested in a small finance bank in India called FinCare and a few other deals in Southeast Asia. It was serendipity. I think I was looking for something that was larger, that was mission oriented. But even when I joined LeapFrog, and I think credit to LeapFrog, it was always about finding sustainable businesses. So they were financial inclusion focused for Fund 2, added healthcare for Fund 3. The problem statement was finding financial inclusion businesses. And we looked at them and evaluated them with a financial and impact lens, but they were always sustainable businesses. There was no cross-subsidization, etc. It's like I had a lot to add and they were looking for someone like me. So that was how it started.
One thing that always sticks in my mind from when I was speaking with Stuart is they're all about making sure that it's sustainable, that's inclusive, but they also have another metric, which is it has to affect a lot of people. And they have very specific metrics. They're not willing to make small impact, right? They're quite articulate about that it had to be a lot of people. Otherwise, they're not going to do it.
I think they communicate on that a lot. Yes, I think reach is very important to them. I think if I can comment on my sectors and the time that I was there, I think financial services have a multiplier effect, right? Even in normal GDP calculations and how you think about the flow of money, giving people loans, giving them insurance, by the nature of what you're providing has a super multiplier effect. So for financial inclusion, I think looking at reach, looking at the household that's impacted is always the right thing to do. And I think while I was there, that was the only thing I was exposed to. So I won't comment on healthcare and climate. But for financial inclusion, I think you can be ambitious, and they were right to do that because that's the nature of the industry. Yeah. I also think, one of the corollaries of financial inclusion, which I always tell my team here who do impact measurement, is emerging economies. And I suspect it's true in Switzerland and the US too. When you apply for a loan or an insurance product, you do give all the information they ask for. You can ask someone anything when they're applying for a loan and they'll tell you. As an investor, you do end up with a treasure trove of information. The family size, the income, the household asset value. So there's a lot you can do with that data. You can slice it and dice it. You can design better products, but that necessarily doesn't port over to other sectors. So when you go for a, a gallbladder removal surgery, you don't necessarily tell people your net worth and, how many dependents you have and things like that. So I feel like some of impact measurement is also influenced by the nature of the industry and what information you naturally have versus you don't.
After you did about 3 years at LeapFrog, you became a founding partner at ABC Impact around early 2019. This was originally backed by Temasek, where you started your career over a decade earlier. And regular listeners to the show will know that we had Eliza Fu on the show a few months back, and that was a great episode. She's great, and everyone should catch up on that if you missed it. What was compelling enough about the ABC Impact vision to leave an established impact fund like LeapFrog to build something from scratch? And was there something poetic for you about returning to the Temasek ecosystem as a entrepreneur this time rather than being an employee?
So we have been incubated by Temasek and Temasek Trust. So Temasek Trust is the philanthropic arm of Temasek, and the two of them kind of put together a team of a few of us and really asked us to think about this idea of an Asia-based, Asia-focused impact fund that would address the pressing issues in Asia, in environment and social. I had already actually left LeapFrog almost 9 months before this opportunity came my way. So again, sort of taking decisions. I wanted to have another child. I took a break and I had my son, who's now 7.5.
You had left LeapFrog for a break. You said, I'm done there. It wasn't maternity break. That chapter's closed and I'm going to figure out what's next.
Yes, I was literally like, want to have another child and I need to put focus on this project. If I keep traveling the way I was traveling in LeapFrog, it would take a few years to get there. So, I optimized on that. So when Temasek and Temasek Trust reached out, it felt like coming home. It felt very privileged and very fortunate and also very empowering that an institution like Temasek and Temasek Trust were really looking at impact investing as a viable way to generate returns and, sort of amplify impact. They gave the three of us, David, who heads up our fund, David Heng, and Xiaoming, my colleague, the three of us were the initial set of people who started working on this. And obviously the tribe has grown. We had the opportunity to have really good backing of the ecosystem, a great ecosystem, a very long-term oriented ecosystem. And we had the flexibility of a small team where we could come up with the strategy, identify the themes that we wanted to invest behind, sort of do a market mapping of the opportunity set. We designed our impact framework from scratch. So in late 2018, we worked with Bridgespan together with Temasek and Temasek Trust to design what impact would mean for this fund. Again, it was a collective project. Eliza was part of that. So it was really a very unique opportunity to have long-term oriented backers, a really energized team, all of whom I knew from before. I had worked with David back in the financial services team at Temasek in 2006, 2007. And it was an opportunity to do something for Asia. So it was really a very privileged position. And we had fun. We raised the first fund in 2019. And again, it was the experience of a first time fund. You sort of go and you pitch, you put together a pitch deck, you sell your idea and sort of get the fund up and running. The other really interesting thing, which, it's a pan-Asian fund, which is again a very unique privilege to be able to sit in Singapore and invest in Southeast Asia and North Asia. It really just gives us such a holistic view on sectors, on regulation, and it really helps us make sort of a more balanced risk assessment.
That's a unique experience to build a fund from zero. Do you have any thoughts on what are the 3 or 4 most critical decisions you have to get right, let's say in the first 6 to 12 months? And where do most people building impact funds fail?
Obviously, the team is really important. We're a human capital business. The resource that we have is just the people. So having the right set of people with the market experience, the market track record and networks, because a lot of this is about originating and getting access to the right opportunities. So I think the team is really important. I will say, having been in private equity now for 20 years, worked in big funds, small funds, I think line of sight to capital and backing is not trivial, right? Because raising a first time fund, it's very difficult. There's a right size at which you can afford a good team, you can afford the infrastructure, you can give people careers rather than stints. So I think, when I started, I was always very conscious and grateful for the fact that we had the backing of a really, really powerful ecosystem that really set us off at a very different place than if we had done it ourselves or for other funds. So I think one of the reasons funds do fail is that it just takes a lot of time to get those first one or two investors together. The fact that we had those people who were sitting together with us designing just got us out the gate faster. And then the third thing is, I think, having a very clear understanding of where you're going to find this balance of returns and impact, because it's very easy to be attracted by momentum, to have to relax your definitions of impact. I think we always started with the market opportunity. So what does the market need? What are the issues that we need to solve in healthcare? What are the issues we need to solve in financial services? And then which businesses are well designed? So I think a more sector-based, thematic-based understanding. Our team is also structured on sectors. It just makes our analysis and our decision making a lot more richer.
That was 2019. You were managing director originally. Then in 2021, you transitioned from that to the chief impact officer at ABC. Now, that's a quite specific role. And when people hear chief impact officer, they might imagine it's a nice title for PR purposes. But explain to me and to listeners, what does your role actually entail, and what do you actually do day to day, and how has this evolved since 2021? Now you've got a few years behind you on that.
I'll start from what's important to ABC Impact. We have always been a fund that's focused on commercial risk-adjusted rate returns with measurable and evidence-backed impact. And I think the measurable and evidence-backed has been something that's part of our DNA. So when we think about our impact management, we've got a team of 3 people. I head up that team. So in addition to me, there's 3 other people. We spend a lot of time on impact assessment before we make the investments, and then on impact monitoring, reporting, and then impact evaluation at exit. That's what the team does. As chief impact officer, my job is to kind of make sure that this function gets the senior leadership, the strategic thinking that is needed to make sure that we are doing it in an evidence-backed manner. So just to give you an example, there's a lot of data points that are missing in Asia. So if you look at even public policy, when we were doing our investment in Kim Dental, this dental chain, just getting access to the information around number of dentists, number of oral hygienists, the kind of procedures people were having on the ground in Vietnam, it was really difficult. We had to conduct primary research, do our own surveys to find out or assess the actual need in the market or the unmet need, or understand how many people were underserved, what was the level of the population. So I think whenever we've done investments, we've been very focused on having a data-driven and evidence-backed approach to impact. And that's the kind of work that my team and I spearhead. All the investment professionals in ABC Impact, we've been very fortunate, are very mission-oriented. And again, because people are sector-focused, they really understand the needs of the sector. So I would say that even the investment team in our setup is very focused on impact, and that's how decisions are made. So my team's job is just to be the center of excellence, to make sure that we can have standards of practice. We can make sure the data is comparable. We can make sure that we build up those case studies and repositories. That's really the focus.
Give us a 10,000 meter view of ABC Impact before we start to drill down.
Absolutely. So ABC Impact is a growth-oriented fund focused on impact. We write anywhere from $30 to $70 million US checks for minority stakes. So we are not a controlling or a controller, a majority investor. We are very partnership focused, provide growth capital. We don't do any early stage tech product risks. So we're not VCs. We're very much in the mid-market private equity space. From a geographic perspective, we are pan-Asian. So we invest in India, Southeast Asia, and China. Currently, we've got significant number of assets in all these markets. From a sector perspective, we have 4 impact themes. I would say 2 of them fall under what people traditionally call social impact. 2 of them would fall under environmental or climate impact. So within social impact, we invest behind financial and digital inclusion. So this is helping people get access to financial products, but also help people get on the digital economy. So, if you think about markets like India, being able to sell your products online, get market linkages through the digital channels, way of making impact. So that's one of our focus themes in social. And then we invest in healthcare and education, which is our second sort of social impact theme. On the climate side, we look at climate and water solutions, which encompasses the whole space of hard assets like renewable energy, waste, recycling, and then climate tech businesses. And then we invest in sustainable food and agriculture. So those would be our 4 themes. We currently have 2 funds. Fund 1 is a 2019 vintage fund. It was $300 million US. That's been invested across 14 companies. We've exited 1 already. And we just raised a second fund, which we announced earlier this year, which is a 600 million fund. We've also added the Asian Development Bank. ADB is one of the prominent LPs who's joined that fund. And that fund will continue the same mandate, just, bigger ticket sizes, 30 to 75 million. We've already deployed, I think we've made 4 investments from that fund already, 3 in India, in financial services and healthcare, and 1 in China.
You have around 900 million assets under management in total. That makes you the largest Pan-Asian impact investor, no?
It does.
Most people in this space talk about balancing impact and returns as if there's an inherent tension. You talk about having no trade-offs, which, that sounds good, really good, and almost too good to be true. What's different about your model, and how have you structured ABC so that doing good and making money aren't competing objectives?
So I think the fundamental way we've done that is we've kind of identified themes where impact is almost correlated to business performance. So we look at businesses where impact is the impactful part of the business, or the impactful product and services that we underwrite are a significant part of that business. So when the business or the product grows, impact grows. So I think we've kind of solved it by selecting sectors where that relation is pretty well established. I would say that there are instances where these move in different directions, but we just don't focus on those. So we've prioritized sectors where business growth and impact are collinear, and that allows us to be more confident that, should we achieve business growth, profitability growth, impact will move in tandem. The scales may be different, but that's how we've kind of addressed it. We are very intentional about the sectors that we invest in. So within healthcare also, it's a very, very vast sector. We have naturally deprioritized sectors where this relationship doesn't exist, or where we feel there is technological or medical risk to the impact being achieved, and really just focused right now more on delivery, pharma, and a few other sectors where this relationship is established. So I think that's one way of ensuring that these two work in tandem. We do spend a lot of time monitoring. So we have a very regular monitoring framework just to make sure that should this relationship change, we are in a position to react.
Your approach, by definition, then does say that there are impact sectors that are underinvested in. And if everyone had your approach, there would be massively underinvested sectors, maybe on social justice side or something like that, that would never have this explosive growth that allows avoiding this tension. I mean, would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And actually, in our first fund, we had an impact theme called Smart and Livable Cities, which was part of our original Fund 1. And as we sourced for deals and as we evaluated deals, we realized that for a number of these subsectors, the commercial risk that we are underwriting is disproportionate to our risk tolerance levels. So a lot of these businesses, for example, have governments as customers or governments as key service providers. So you're in infrastructure, you're in sort of cities, and that risk is a very different risk outside of Singapore. The Singapore government obviously is perfectly underwritable risk, but in different parts of Asia, having the government as a key stakeholder in your business economics is not always that straightforward to underwrite from a commercial perspective. So we did deprioritize, and for Fund 2, that is not a focus sector. So you're right that we are doubling down on sectors, and there exist many sectors which will remain underinvested because they don't have that disproportional risk. My only counterpoint to you is that we're a private equity product, and the definition of success in a private equity product is established already, which we don't have the privileged currently to rewrite. So I think, our success is measured in the traditional private equity sense also. So I think it's not unreasonable for us to make this decision. But there do exist sectors, I would say sanitation, hygiene, social justice, where this relationship doesn't exist.
If impact investing is truly the future, then why are most of the smartest investors in the world still pursuing traditional private equity and venture capital?
So I think what impact investing is saying is that the impact investing movement, which does have some really smart investors, is looking to direct capital to amplify these solutions, which can address some of our challenges around financial inclusion, healthcare, etc. So the mission is to direct capital, as much capital as possible, to these businesses that exist. I don't think we're saying that we can solve all the world's problems. And I think when you think about, there are a category of issues which require very different type of capital. I think one of the differentiating factors of impact investing, which I feel we haven't talked about, that I'd like to bring up at this point, is the decision to make the investment, right? I think the underwriting of the investment. I think we as impact investors underwrite ex ante expectation of impact. So I think one of the things that we do differently from traditional private equity is we spend a lot of time before we make the decision to invest on actually taking a view or a hypothesis on the kind of impact we think will be achieved. And I think that's the difference between that intentional allocation of capital. Private equity also in certain cases has tremendous amount of impact, but that is a ex post impact. They could have invested in some businesses which have really changed the world, solved some crucial problems. But when they made the decision to allocate, they only looked at the commercial part. And I think that's where we are different, that we actually make a case that this impact will be underwritten. We track it. And if it doesn't make the case, right, our LPs hold us accountable to the way we allocate capital. So I think it's in the selection and in the decision making that we're different. And I obviously make the case that more and more money needs to flow into this space. But I'm conscious that not all subsectors or not all business types can achieve this kind of dual.
You organize your investment thesis around what you have called two sources of impact, the social and climate. And you said people need the planet thriving and the planet is impacted by people. These aren't separate buckets, are they? They're interconnected systems. So how do you think about this interconnection when you're evaluating potential investments? How do you assess the ripple effects across both these social and environmental dimensions?
People and planet, it's so intertwined, right? So I'll answer this in two ways. So when we think about impact underwriting, we underwrite impact on individuals and we underwrite impact on systems. For example, even in healthcare, we've put out some thinking around how we think it's important to invest in businesses that are helping the healthcare system become stronger, not just businesses that are directly treating a patient. And then we also look at the planet. So we've always had a holistic way of thinking about impact. In fact, one of our investments in India, which is in agriculture, actually has an impact on the soil, the use of water, but it also has an impact on farmers and farmer livelihoods, right? So I think from an impact assessment perspective, we have always looked at different stakeholders in each of these impact evaluations. I think where it gets interesting is the communication of impact, right? I think if you look at our decks a few years ago, this division of climate and social was not as stark as it is now. I think as some of the conversation has evolved to talk about it in these ways. But if you look at our theory of change, which we've put out on our website, you will see that our climate themes talk about impact on planet and people. So when we don't think about these two things separately when we do impact measurement.
You've already mentioned this, four thematic investment sectors, and they are climate and water solutions, financial and digital inclusion, better health and education, and sustainable food and agriculture. How did you arrive at these specific four areas for the Asian market? And how do they align with the UN SDGs, which are important to you as well?
So when we started, we looked at the Council for Sustainable Development, BSDC's initial reports on what the gaps are in Asia and where the funding is needed. And that's how we started with the first kind of 5 themes, which included sustainable, smart and livable cities. So that was the origin of our work, where BSDC had put out reports sort of mapping the needs in Asia for these themes. And these were the four most important themes that emerged. Over time, we've been able to sort of refine our thinking within each theme to also map the opportunity set. Because one of the things in private equity or in investing is that you need to find targets or investable assets that can be backed, where you can deploy money. So what we've done is over the last few years, we've sort of sharpened within each of these themes our focus areas to make sure that we are focused on places where the opportunity set kind of maps the need set. So where does money needed and where we can find companies that can absorb our capital or where we can find founders that we can back.
You are very focused on quantifying impact all the way through, and you have a proprietary impact measurement and management system. So you've mentioned the 3 Cs, which I think are consistency, comparability, and communicability. These sound like pretty significant challenges, especially in some of the regions that you're working in, some of the sectors. Can you explain what each of these means? And then how do you manage the balance between them?
This question can take us a few hours. So let me unpack it a little bit. So when you think about our impact measurement and management system, this was designed in 2018, 2019 with a few design principles. And I want to take the opportunity to share those because I think they are really important for people who are listening. We wanted to design a framework that would be applicable across sectors. So we always started with the view that we were going to be multi-sector and that we were going to have a consistent way of looking at impact across all the deals. We had a design principle that we would not offset impact, or we wouldn't have like a barbell strategy where some companies were super, super impactful and then some companies could be non-impactful, and then we wouldn't have the cross sort of, we would have a standard high bar for every investment. That was another sort of design principle. And then the third design principle was that we would underwrite and manage and measure impact all through the investment cycle. And using those principles, we identified the IMP, which is the Impact Management Project, which has the 5 dimensions of impact. You can look it up. It's actually now a system that's adopted by most of the leading impact investors. So we're very happy. The last thing you want to do is come up with a completely new way of doing things, right? So we're quite glad that we chose a system around which a large part of the industry has collaborated.
I just wanted to mention these are the 5 dimensions of impact: the what, the who, how much, the contribution, and the risk, right? So everyone knows what you're referring to here.
Yeah, perfect. So we just designed a rubric around these 5 dimensions that allows us to score each deal. So just like you have an IRR for the investment, a passing IRR or a threshold IRR, we have a threshold score. And we've designed a rubric for each of our themes. So every healthcare deal will have the same scoring rubric, and then we can compare. That's really worked well for us in the last 6 to 7 years. So that's on the IMM. It's a live document. It's a live system that we put in place. We keep refining it and adding to it, but the base of it is the IMP. Now, when you come to impact measurement and the 3 Cs, which I use as a communication tool, you want to measure what matters. Right. So I think that's the first principle. I don't know if you've heard of Goodhart's rule, but, what gets measured gets done, for example. So you have to be clear about what you're going to measure. It needs to be related to the business. It can be different for different businesses. So we start from we use the IRIS database that the GIN has of metrics. So we use that as a source. Again, to go back to that consistency and comparability, we want to align with the industry. And I think the whole impact investment space is working really hard to align impact measurement. So we identify key KPIs for each investment. We agree with the company that these are the KPIs we're going to measure. And then we do our best to do some amount of aggregation within a particular thematic to be able to communicate, right? Like how many people in the healthcare portfolio, what are the kind of impacts we've written in the financial services portfolio. So it's a constant pursuit. I think being able to give people consistent metrics that they can then compare across funds and that they can then understand is really what we spend most of our time and energy on.
So you're 6 years into using this framework. What have you learned about what works, what doesn't when it comes to measuring impact?
I think fewer relevant metrics work. I think for both the companies to understand what we're measuring, for us to communicate to our LPs, for us to define what is success and what is failure, having fewer but more specific or industry or subsector specific metrics has been what has worked for us. And we are trying to get sharper and sharper around that. I think recognizing the limitations of data and quantitative is also a reality. I think it's tough to say that, but we realize that the story is not complete with just numbers. So we do spend a lot of time doing qualitative assessments. We last year published a report together with Dalberg on the impacts of our social companies, social impact companies. These are 5 companies in Asia. We did qualitative surveys of almost 2,000 customers, stakeholders, students, parents, etc., to glean a lot of insights around the product, around how impact was being experienced, to complement our quantitative understanding of, how many customers bought the product, how many customers were satisfied, what's the NPS score. So I think there is a realization that some amount of qualitative work, some amount of sampling and understanding detailed beneficiary lens of impact is very important.
Have you migrated to a standard approach in terms of KPIs? You said that less is more. Are there any that seem to be more important than others that you find yourself going to and leaning on more?
I think if I answer that as an impact practitioner, I would say that there's only a few things that can be aggregated, right? Besides reach numbers or income levels, it's not that easy to aggregate across themes. Within a theme, we're doing a lot of work. So within healthcare, within financial inclusion, we can give you a very nuanced picture, even with few metrics. But it's a pursuit. This comparison across themes and across sectors is not straightforward. We have been valiantly also trying to make a case that it's not relevant, that, measuring the impact of a climate investment that does, say, biofuels and comparing that to a hospital or a dialysis chain is not really the right comparison to make. Within a sector, we've done work with the GIN. We've contributed to their ag index, their financial services index. So as a community, I think the impact investing community, we're trying to build a lot more nuanced understanding of impact, but within a sector. And I think that's where all the effort should go. We do aggregate numbers. If you look at our impact reports, we do aggregate, but these by definition are aggregation of reach numbers. So the number of people impacted, the number of customers reached, the number of farmers, anything else is tough to do.
Can you describe for me a couple of specific investments that exemplify ABC's investing approach in real life? Maybe you could just walk us through and pick a couple from the different thematics that you are focusing on.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll pick one in each geography and then kind of take it from there. So in China, we have invested in a company called Da Mi Xiaomi, which basically means big rice, little rice. It's an autism rehab therapy chain. It's very unique in the sense that it was started by a founder who is a mother herself, and her child was diagnosed as being on the spectrum. And then when that happened, she sort of started looking out for products and services and therapy providers who could help her. And she identified this need, this underserved need of not having high quality therapy services available in China. She started this business, which provide 1:1 therapy, but also 1:many therapy for kids within the age of 3 to 6, which is when the intervention is most impactful. We came across the founder. Our team sort of was tracking the space. They found the founder, again, very mission driven, very focused on addressing the core problems since she had experienced it herself. Worked with a teacher to adapt the curriculum to the Chinese culture. So a lot of work around the ABA curriculum went into sort of localizing it for that context, for that society. That's been a tremendous experience for us in terms of, underwriting impact on kids, working with them on how to measure the impact. The experience has just been super enriching for the team. So that's one in our sort of healthcare space. The other investment that's been really super interesting is CropIn, which is an Indian cultural technology business. So this is in our sustainable food and ag space. So the CropIn founders founded this business in 2011. That's almost 14 years ago, where the idea was to use technology to help smallholder farmers solve basic agronomic practices, when to plant, when to sow, how to prevent weather challenges, how to deal with common pests, what kind of things to put. And they basically designed a solution that allows using mobile phones to get information on what agronomic practices to follow, allows them to get weather information. It allows people like Cargill or McCain to sort of track what their farmers are doing. So again, intervention for smallholder farmers, they produce 70% of the world's food. But if you look at their income levels over the last few decades, there's hardly been any change. So this is one of the really interesting businesses that addresses both social and climate impact. We originated this deal through our own network. We've got a whole bunch of people. We've got the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation who's supporting the business. We recently got Google, who joined the cap table to sort of leverage the amount of data that CropIn has collected.
How do you measure impact in that sector?
Yeah, so impact for CropIn, actually, we've been able to track farmer level productivity. So because we have a lot of information, we've done a few studies to check the yield of a crop before and after using CropIn services. And there's been very positive results around farmers being able to do the right interventions to make sure that their yield can be better using the SaaS product. And we've just actually started in the last few years tracking soil health and tracking what's been grown on each plot of land. And that's another way to kind of get a sense of impact. It's actually pretty easy for IT systems. It's pretty effective.
So that's two sectors.
Yes. And then in Southeast Asia, we invested in Sunseap, which is a rooftop renewable business that started in Singapore and expanded into Vietnam and some of the other Southeast Asian economies. This business, we were able to exit. So the whole business was sold to EDPR, which is the Spain and Portugal electric utility company. We were one of the early backers in the solar renewable space. So again, an environmental deal in Southeast Asia that we were able to get a successful exit from. So those are three good examples across Pan-Asian.
You have 4 themes. Do you have one more example? Or?
Financial inclusion. Yes, of course. So we've invested in 3 financial inclusion businesses, 1 in China and 2 in India, which basically provide loans to small and medium enterprises. We have invested in iFinance and Vistar, which both address the MSME market, one of which gives unsecured loans and the other one gives secured or asset-backed loans. And then we've also invested in Chongo Bridge, which is the largest microfinance business in China, which provides small loans to farmers to sort of input into the agricultural economy for livestock, feed produce, seeds, etc.
So I'm interested in that. How are you doing private equity in China and moving capital out? How does that work?
It's been an evolving situation. I think we are very focused on sectors where, we can see a very distinct impact and which are not directly related to any, government sectors. So our sectors are more in the healthcare space or in the financial services space, serving the underserved. I would say more domestic demand driven, more addressing needs in society. It's not been a straightforward market, but I think we're very confident. We have a lot of networks there. We've got people on the ground. So we continue to remain investing. We've actually invested in a business earlier this year, but we're cautious. I think we're focused on making sure that we can get a path to liquidity. We are looking at more cash flow generative and profitable businesses. So our risk underwriting has changed, but from an impact perspective, I think we continue to find pockets where I think our capital can make a difference.
Are you still bullish on China?
Yes, we are long-term bullish. We look at Asia as a pan-Asian market, and I think it's a great privilege. And it's also a way to diversify risk.
The fundraising environment for impact investing has evolved, dramatically during your tenure. You raised your first fund in 2019, which was about 300 million, and you recently closed your second fund over 600 million. How has the conversation with limited partners changed over that time? Are they more sophisticated about impact measurement now? Or are they still primarily focusing on financial returns? How has this gone?
I think the conversation around impact measurement has definitely become more nuanced. There are different types of LPs. Let me say this. I think there's a set of limited partners who have really spent a lot of time educating themselves about impact. The conversation and understanding has moved, and they spend a lot of time doubling down into impact numbers, impact performances. Then there's a set of investors who are new to the space and who require some amount of education and handholding. We've generally found the receptiveness to impact as being very positive. There's a huge willingness to learn. I think when it comes to capital allocation, there are some factors which are universal to the space, right? So I think where the capital allocators are in their own liquidity cycle in terms of how much they've committed, how much they expect to come back, that has been played an influence. I think this emerging markets versus developed markets is also challenging. I think people have just seen very strong returns in developed markets over the last few years. So, I expect this to change. So I'm a lot more bullish for the next few years. But I think that's a question that we've faced a lot, where return versus risk in emerging markets has been something that people have spent a lot of time trying to get comfortable on. And some people have just not gotten across the line. What's worked in our favor is obviously that we're large, we're Pan-Asian, we're backed by some really high quality, and we have demonstrated good start of a track record.
What's the most challenging question you get from potential LPs about the trade-offs between impact and returns? And how do you respond when someone asks you to prove that doing good like this doesn't compromise financial performance?
What I find most frustrating is when people have made up their mind that this is not possible when they start the meeting, right? So I think one of the challenges we face is trying to address this question of trade-offs, and people have already made up their mind. And I think that's one of the most challenging conversations to go into, because it's difficult to bring them to a more holistic way of looking at things or to explain our sector strategy, etc. I think one of the things that frustrates me most, maybe I can position it that way, is this high bar for impact measurement or impact achievement that you don't necessarily see for financial metrics. Like, to give you an example, again, I speak in my personal capacity when I say this, is that when you present an investment, you present expected IRR, right? And expected IRR is an expectation that has a lot of assumptions baked into it, and you take it for what it is. It's not gospel truth. It's an indicator of what you expect to achieve. And then when you exit the investment is when you actually get the return on the investment, right? The actual DPI, TBPI. There's no expectation that you do quarterly reports, but nobody expects that quarterly report is a judgment on the investment. Eventually you have an entry IRR and you have an exit IRR. The expectation from impact that, you should have a quarterly update, that you should quarterly show directions and impact, this belief, if you present a few numbers, I think that's something that frustrates me a lot. I do try to make the case that I should present impact at the time of investment and at the time of exit and just be judged on those two numbers, rather than, have to present quarterly numbers, because that kind of feeds into this challenge, right? Like, how can you have impact on every quarter? That's what frustrates me the most.
So there's a double standard. Oftentimes there's a hockey stick on the financial, but impact has to be straight line.
Or if it reduces, then there's a lot of explanation. And, and in the same breath, people tell me that, how can impact be measured in one number? So there's a lot of that kind of double standard.
You've been backing mission-driven founders for over a decade now. I'm curious about pattern recognition here. What are the characteristics of entrepreneurs who can successfully balance mission with commercial viability? And on the flip side, what are the warning signs that someone is more interested in doing good or feeling good about their mission than actually delivering measurable outcomes?
This is a great question. And I'm just going to spend a minute telling you a story about our own ABC Impact team. So in ABC Impact, we have two stages in the impact measurement to mirror your commercial assessment, right? You have a first stage where you give a term sheet, and then you start diligence. So in impact, we have the impact screening process, where we have a early screen on whether this company should we do more work? And then we have the impact diligence process. So when we were designing the screen, we tried to keep it simple, and we tried to keep it sort of binary, where people could answer yes, no kind of questions with basic information. And I am maybe a couple of meetings with the company. And one of the criteria in our screen is intentionality. And when we were designing the screen, that criteria was the one that people were most circumspect about, because they felt, well, it's quite qualitative. How are you going to measure intentionality? We designed some rubrics around, why have the founders set up this business? Who are the other people on the cap table? What kind of other people have funded this? So we tried to think about different ways of feeding into this intentionality decision. And we started with the screen and we said, let's go with it. We understand that it's a qualitative feature, but let's present it to IC. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why we think this team is intentional and, committed to the mission. And what we found over the last 6 years, and particularly during tough times of COVID, where some businesses really went through a roller coaster, it's actually people who indexed very highly on intentionality that have been the most resilient. Those founding teams have been able to pivot. Those founding teams have been able to make adjustments to the business model, but still stay in the same direction of travel for impact. Just to give you an example, we have an edtech business in India called Vedantu. Fantastic set of founders, teachers themselves, enjoyed a great tailwind in COVID, where adoption of sort of edtech solutions was really amplified. Saw a roller coaster dip once kids went back to school with a vengeance, once COVID was away, and then have now sort of found the new normal, pivoted their business, added a few different service lines. And really what's kept them going through this turbulent time has been the fact that they started the business with the intention of, revolutionizing education at scale. They're teachers themselves. So very, very mission aligned. We are very mission aligned too. We are very focused on the eventual impact. We supported them for doing some studies around outcome measurements for students during the post-COVID times. That's just one example to tell you that something that may seem amorphous or that may seem qualitative can actually over time be a very good indicator of, which founding team is going to be a great partner. And I will say that companies and founding teams or management are now pretty nuanced about asking investors these questions also. I think people have learned that, they want to find investors with the right mindset, with the right partnership approach. They don't want to find fair weather friends. They really want to find people who are looking at the problem in the same way and are looking at solving the problem in a similar way.
So that argues that mission-driven companies are more resilient.
I agree. We believe that. We're doing some work to make that case with data.
That challenges almost everything most investors believe about risk, where they actually believe that it's less risky to maximize profit than to do this balancing act.
I think when we talk about mission aligned, we're talking about people who are trying to solve the same end problem while achieving. I think we're not saying that they're not solely focused on profit maximization. They want that problem statement to be solved. I think for us as impact investors, it's really important. It's not an ideal outcome to have maximized profit, but not have solved the actual problem that we all set out to address in the first instance.
You're passionate about gender equality. What are the practical ways you support increasing what you call the tribe of female founders?
So I spend some time coaching female founders on the fundraising journey. And, this is a call out for anybody who's listening, who's a female founder, to please feel free to reach out. I think the process of raising money, the nature of the funding community, I think there's a lot that I feel, because I've been on this side of the table and I listen to so many pitches every day, I feel I have a privileged feedback that I can provide. So I do spend some time mentoring female founders. I'm also part of the TIE network in Singapore, which runs sort of specific programs for funding female founded businesses. I also believe that if we can increase the tribe of female funders, there's probably a balanced view on this side of the table too. Obviously, our industry it's well known to be very dominated by men. I think it's changing. It will change. I'm very optimistic, but the current situation is what it is. That most often than not, the people you are pitching to will be men. There's just so much we can teach or we can adjust in how we pitch. Selling is a unique thing, right? I think, selling, pitching is something that requires investment. You have to learn how to do it. You have to learn how to do it well.
When you are coaching or mentoring a female founder, entrepreneur, what are the most important pieces of advice you give them about positioning their company for investment? What do you think they need to understand about how investors think that might not be, in your experience, immediately obvious to them?
The first thing is that women tend to talk more about risk than opportunity. And this is documented. I think there are studies where women start pitches by being realistic about, the challenges versus the opportunity set. And I think when you're pitching, particularly for early stage companies, I think decisions are indexed on the opportunity set, on how big the opportunity set is, how exciting the opportunity set is. And the risks, while logical and required, are almost a secondary conversation. So the first pitch is about getting people excited about the market, the problem statement, the solution you have. So I think that's one common thing that I tend to ensure that people spend more time selling the upside rather than trying to spend a lot of time explaining what could go wrong. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is, another common trait I find is that women tend to have multiple pillars of identity, right? So we are investment professionals. In my case, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a wife. We can fluidly switch between one identity to another. It can literally in one conversation happen that you can move into multiple. But when you're pitching, you have to stay in that identity. And it's really important that you stay in that identity and you don't veer into any other identity. Because if people want to give you a few $1 million, they want to be convinced that you're going to stay on this path. What's driving you, what's your motivation. So one of my very personal pieces of advice is to tell people to go into that mode, right? And not let yourself get steered into, how many children do you have? Or, these are very obvious questions and you should answer them factually and you shouldn't, obfuscate or anything of that kind, but don't let that off ramp switch your identity, right? Stay in that lane of being a founder who's committed to this business, who needs to raise money or get a decision from this meeting. So I think that's another common thing that I tell myself, honestly. Even coming into this podcast, I have to remind myself that, you stay in that persona. Don't give into the temptation of, talking about many other personas that you are very happy to occupy. The final piece is around the partnership, right? Like what's the team you have, and making sure that you pitch effectively as a team. Because of often founders are teams of people. You have the solitary founder, but often you see a lot more teams. And I think I spend some time talking to people or encouraging them to think about being effective as a team rather than just as an individual presenting.
What are the systematic barriers that prevent women from accessing capital in Asia?
I think entrepreneurship is still seen as a risky venture. I would say it's changing, and I would say on the ground it's changing. But even today, if you're a young person and you pursue entrepreneurship, there is a general sense that, you're taking on a riskier outcome, just safety in salaries and safety in having that sort of predictable income stream. So I think risk is one thing. I think society structure and, is also a factor. I think, depending on where you are in the age spectrum and which part of Asia you are in, there are different things society expects you to be doing in those age brackets, which don't always fall very easily with fundraising and running your own shop. Being an entrepreneur is literally the single most difficult thing you can do. It's a full-time job. It's almost 2 jobs or 3 jobs, if you may call it that. I think those would be the 2 top, I think. I think getting access to funding is changing. I haven't looked at the latest data, but certainly you don't have 50-50 representation in the founder world. That's also a bit of a structural thing, that you don't see enough other women raising money, or you don't see enough women funding.
That's not only in Asia, though. I think the last statistics, I've had Sharon Bosmick and Tara Bishop and a few others on who are from America. And I think they've said that VC allocation to founders are something like 6% of women. Founders are women, somewhere around that.
I don't know if you speak to more people, but one of the thought experiments I always thought that one of the universities should do is have AI kind of mask the voice of someone pitching, and to see, to see the selection based on that rate, or just randomly switch genders, right? So you have 2 people pitch, they record the pitch, and then AI just switches their voice modulation, etc., and see. I'm sure someone's done that study, but that's always something I think about, right? Like, why don't we do that as a first round of elimination and see what the outcome is?
One of the earliest episodes I did with Sharon Bosmick, and she'll be coming on sometime later this year because she's out fundraising right now, but she's all about that. And that's kind of her raison d'etre. And she's in Silicon Valley. She has the SIFT. That's their funnel process of the screens in order to get to deals. And don't know that at the time I spoke with her, they were using AI like that, but they definitely don't know who's made the proposal when they're passing it around through their network. So you don't know if it's a man or a woman. She feels that the conversations just don't happen in the same place for women as they do for men. So still a bit of a clubby environment for men, whereas the women, they're having the conversations in different places with them. And so she feels that it's stacked, that a lot of times the decisions are made and you're not even in the room.
I wouldn't disagree with that. But I will say that, shout out to the impact investing industry, a lot more women in our space.
That just might mean men don't care about impact. They're happy with maximizing return. She's mainly talked only about that. Looking at the evolution of impact measurement, let's say over the past decade that you've been doing this, do you think that we're moving towards something like GAAP, like the generally accepted accounting principles, but more like generally accepted impact principles? Or is impact just inherently too contextual and too qualitative to standardize at some level like that?
I'm quite optimistic. I wouldn't call it the gap, but I would say that yes, some basic tenets within a certain sector, I think there's quite a lot of enthusiasm and work being done towards being able to express it from that perspective. And if you look at the IRIS metrics that the GIN has put out, they're pretty comprehensive. So as long as we choose within that set, I think more comparison should be possible. I think the question maybe I put back to the audience is, what decision are people trying to make with that data, right? And I think, are you trying to decide whether this impact fund has the right methods of measuring? I think we already have enough systems and processes for people to make that decision, right? The second order decision is the dollar amount being allocated achieving the right scale of impact within a particular sector, and how should you direct money? If you were passionate about agriculture, which types of investments or types of funds should you invest to maximize impact for every dollar invested? I think that's the work that we are trying to do now within people like Jen and within some communities to be able to share some of that data. But that data will come only with investment cycles, right? As more and more people make investments, we will complete that cycle. This is a long feedback loop industry. Every fund is 10 years, 12 years. So I think that data we're already collecting and we're sharing. It's a very collaborative industry, but it will take time for that level of sort of historical data to present itself. I think if people are looking for that elusive star, which tells you whether this is impact and this is not impact, I think, again, it's the question you frame in your head. That question will never be answered. So I think whenever people ask me, what data they want or, do you have this data? I always ask, what question are you trying to answer? If you can tell me the question you're trying to answer, I can give you the data, or I can tell you that my team doesn't have the data. The company doesn't have the data. So I think it's, I'm very optimistic for the first two questions. We are reasonably well evolved in terms of what we should measure for which sector. We are working as an industry to be able to share and compare that across themes, across geographies. But that will take time. The richness of that data will come with time.
You've referred to the IRIS Plus metrics, and you've referred to the GIN, which is the Global Impact Investing Network, and you use the IRIS Plus. I had Sir Ronald Cohen on the show, a couple months ago, and he was talking about his latest initiative with the IFVI, which is, if I got this right, I'm terrible with these acronyms, but International Foundation for Valuing Impact. So there is some movement towards standardized frameworks. But where do you think the industry needs to be in 5 years to gain the same credibility and comparability as traditional financial metrics?
I think these are the right direction of travel. I think we need to find or give people the ability to compare across funds and to be able to compare the impact of each dollar, whether that's done in the form of valuing it, whether that's done in the form of common accepted principles. I think even SSB is kind of working towards having standardized ways for sustainability disclosure. So I think direction of travel is right. Where I feel, people may be disappointed is that it may not get there as fast because it's just investments are longer duration and we all need to get the returns, get the impact, feed that into a system for that system to then have the right amount of data.
Sugandhi, you've made this bold statement I found somewhere in my research that Asia is at the heart of the global impact story. I want to understand what you mean by that and what makes Asia different from impact investing in other regions. And maybe you can comment on what do Western investors misunderstand about the Asian context that limits their effectiveness there?
I think the opportunity set and the problem statements, I would say, in Asia are the largest. We have the largest population living in this continent. We've got the most amount of development alongside Africa to achieve in the next couple of decades. So I think from an opportunity set perspective, this is the place to be. And we have, I would say there's two things I'm very optimistic about. We have Asian capital that's coming online to fund some of this growth. And we're innovating. I think one of the most exciting things about Asia is that, solutions that are being developed in Asia for issues in Asia are unique. We're finding different solutions. So I think one of the paradigms that needs to change is kind of the North solutions being applied to the global South. And I think you can see that in EVs, in battery technology, in battery swapping. There's different models coming up. There's different ways to solving the same problem, and Asia is innovating. So I think the opportunity set is big. The population is big. We need a fair amount of money to fund some of this change on the ground, which is why we think, Asia is kind of the place to be. I think if there was a message for investors that are outside of Asia, I would just encourage them to spend more time in the market, right? I think it's very important to be here, to see the optimism on the ground, to meet with the young entrepreneurs who are really building businesses to address some of these issues, to feel that enthusiasm rather than to evaluate from a distance.
Why should an institutional investor allocate capital to ABC rather than a comparable fund focused on other emerging markets?
Well, we are pan-Asian. We are pan-sector. We've got a great team with more than 20 years of experience, each one of us. And we've got a great track record. So if you're looking to invest, please find me and I can tell you more about each one of those.
And what would happen to the world if every major investment fund adopted ABC's approach tomorrow?
We'd have some really champion companies. We'd large companies addressing some of our challenges around financial inclusion, healthcare. We'd have some great examples to export to the rest of the world. A lot of solutions will come out of Asia that can find use in the US and in Europe. And there'll just be a lot of cross-pollination of technology. I think that's one of the technology is a big enabler. We don't speak about that much, but, the asymmetric impact that we are seeing in healthcare, in education, just using technology is something that we feel that the world can learn from actually from Asia.
Have you exited from your companies in your first fund?
We have exited from one. We are working on a few more.
What is your exit strategy?
3 primary strategies is obviously listing. Some markets are more amenable to listing. So I would say like in India, Southeast Asia, I think listing in China is not that straightforward today. So it's either listing or a strategic sale. So Sunseap, which was our exit, was a sale, 100% sale of the company to a strategic. And we're also seeing a very thriving secondary market. So there are larger private equity funds to whom we can sell the complete asset. So all 3 options are available in our markets.
I want to ask you one more question, and it's a personal one. You've dedicated your career to using capital as a force for positive change. If you could go back and have a conversation with yourself when you were first making the transition from traditional private equity to impact investing, what would you warn that younger version of yourself about the realities of trying to change the world through investment? And what misconceptions did you have that experience corrected?
The way to respond to that is the way I think impact is most achieved is really by understanding the problems in the sector. So today when people come to me, and a lot of young people reach out to me for advice on careers, etc., I think a lot of focus and a lot of change will come within the industries themselves. So if you're in material sciences, if you're in aviation, if you're in shipping, I think the solutions will come from within the industry, right? I think that is something I'm very excited about versus a very top-down drive to have broad targets on sustainability or broad targets on energy use. I think within these companies is where the innovation and where these really systemic changes will come, whether it's plastic, packaging, travel, communication. That's been something that, if I was younger, I would kind of reinforce that, spend more time in a sector, understand what are the pain points in that sector, which is why, we are also at ABC Impact doubling down on a sector-based strategy, because I think we really believe that the solutions will come from companies who are in the sector, from people, founders who've been in the sector for 20 years. They understand where the pain points are.
Sugandhi, I've got a few rapid fire questions for you before we wrap up. Don't overthink these. Just give me whatever comes to your mind, or if nothing does, feel free to say pass. That's okay too. But if you had to name the single most important challenge in the impact investment space at this time, what would you say it would be?
Consistency, comparability, and communicability of impact.
What do you know now about impact investing that you wish you would have known when you showed up for work at LeapFrog?
How much time I would spend explaining this no trade-offs between profit and purpose.
You don't have to name names, but can you describe an investment that you made that you were convinced of at the time you invested? It ticked all of your impact boxes, but in the end, it didn't turn out and went pear-shaped. And what was the lesson learned from that experience?
I think one of the common challenges we've underestimated, without going into what's gone pear-shaped, because, so far in our fund one, we're still tracking well. I think what a challenge we have commonly underestimated that we are doing some work on now is for all our companies that are trying to create a new category. So for example, one of our Indian companies is in rehab and recovery. So anything post-op medical care, speech and swallow therapy, post-stroke rehabilitation. They have been pioneers in that space, and they have written the national standards. They've figured out how to get standardized. They have started cashless insurance. So the cost of building the ecosystem, being the creator, being the first one to provide, I think that is something that we as investors and companies and management teams have consistently underestimated. And I'm not sure we get value for that, which is a unique challenge for us as impact investors, because we want to fund these solutions, but then the cost that we're all taking on, the people just copy. You open a category, you figure out a model that works, and then, 5 other people fund 5 companies who've not spent the last 5 years doing what you've been doing.
Conversely, can you describe an investment that you had some level of skepticism at the time you made, or you passed on it, and that it ended up performing way better than you expected? And what was the lesson learned from that one?
I think timing. I've learned this is less about impact and more about investing. I think when you think about some sectors and some opportunities, I think the timing has been off. So, they were too expensive. And you underestimate the upside. So there are a few deals, cash checks I wish I had written, which seemed expensive at that time. But, history showed that they were pretty cheap.
Lastly, if someone wants to get into the impact investment space, where would you advise them to start, or how would you advise them to start, someone probably younger in their career?
I always answer this in 2 ways. So you either double down on the investing part, or you double down on the impact part. So if you're interested in the financial part, start your career with investing, understand investing, study investing. If you're interested in the impact measurement side, double down a little bit on understanding either environmental sciences or social sciences, spend some time learning the measurement techniques. So it depends on what you want, but start with the fundamentals of either one. You can build towards sort of meeting of the two.
Sugandhi, this has been good. This has been really good. I want to thank you for taking time to go through all of this with me today. I've really learned a lot. You've been on quite a journey.
Thank you. It's been really nice. Thank you so much for spending 2 hours with me.
Before we wrap up, tell everyone where they can learn more about ABC Impact and all the amazing things you guys are doing there. And, where should they go out to find more, your websites and social media and all those things?
Yeah, you can find out everything that we do at www.abcimpact.com.sg. I think we've put out 5 impact reports. I would really start with the first one, which is almost a Bible or a how to do impact investing in Asia document, where we spend a lot of time putting out all our thinking. You can follow us on LinkedIn. We're at ABC Impact. And then, of course, you can, follow me on LinkedIn and see what I post. You want to learn about impact investing? I think the GIN is a great place to start. And then we also have the Center for Impact Investing in Practices, CIIP, within our own ecosystem, who do a lot of great work in putting out thinking on impact investing in Asia.
And what's the best way for people to contact you if someone wants to reach out to you?
Feel free to email me. I'm at sugandhi@abcimpact.com.sg. I'm happy for you to put that in your podcast.
Okay, everybody, go to abcimpact.com.sg. Don't forget that SG at the end. Lots of good information there, and get your first impact report, which is a free how to do impact, everything you want to know about impact investing in Asia for free. Sugandhi, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you. It was really great. And then if you're ever in Singapore, please do look us up. We'd love to host you to a nice Chinese lunch or dinner.
I will definitely do that, and it happens from time to time. Goodbye, everybody.
You've been listening to SRI 360. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe to get future episodes. You can find an archive of all previous podcast interviews and more articles and information on SRI, ESG, impact investing, sustainable investing, and socially responsible investing at our website, sri360.com. If you'd like to read more lessons learned from world-class SRI investors, get a copy of Scott Arnell's book, Sustainable and Responsible Investing 360. It's a must-read for anyone wanting to know more about investing for positive social, environmental, and ethical impact, all with market financial returns. These are the stories and tactics of those leading the way as sustainable and responsible investing goes mainstream. Sustainable and Responsible Investing 360 is now available in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook format wherever books are sold.